We are part of everything, and everything is a part of us. We are human only through the humanity of others. I am because we are. Ubuntu. A tale that's told throughout the sands of time. Outside its monster of human mind. We're people beneath our sun. Through other people we unite as one. A seed is planted and a flower grows. And a small tender kiss, that is how it goes. When a boy meets a girl under starlit skies, and the wedding of all is seen in their eyes.
Welcome to Ubuntu Storytellers, our first annual shout out honoring our Black and Brown fathers. I am Denise Keys Page, storyteller and racial equity facilitator and founder of Ubuntu Storytellers. So who is Ubuntu Storytellers? Ubuntu, I am because we are. We were formed in November 2020, partly in response to the social protests that erupted after George Floyd's murder. It was formed to provide a safe space to hear stories of Black and Brown people in America, to deepen our empathy and our connections, and hopefully move us collectively and individually to be able to answer the question, but what can I do? Story listening is the first module of our workshop series. We use stories as springboards to process what we feel, what we know, and what we need to know so that we can do. Tonight, you will experience one of our storytelling modules. We think you'll feel the power and you can imagine the impact of a full program. We do invite you to contact us for more information about the Ubuntu Storytellers workshop series for your organization, community, or workplace. The beginning to answer the question, but what can I do? We are sponsored tonight by Indaba. Indaba, the word means a council of the wise convened to discuss important matters. And we will tell you more about Indaba before this presentation ends. And now, what you are all here for, storytelling by a cast of some of the finest the profession offers. We have newbies and we have well-known, nationally acclaimed tellers. I promise you, no matter their experience, you will be wowed by their talent and their story. These are personal narratives, people bravely opening their Black and brown lived experience, not just for enjoyment, entertainment, but for the benefit of building bridges. We have 6 tellers tonight. I will introduce the first 3. You will hear from them. And then I will introduce the next 3. Our first teller of the evening is Mr. Larry Castleberry. Larry is a storyteller who loves to tell personal family story with words of wisdom, as well as rich stories and fables from the world of African American and African folktales. He also tells stories from the world of the martial arts. Larry's goal is to inform, entertain, and educate. As well as being a storyteller, he is an avid chess player and a student and teacher of the martial art of Aikido. He had the pleasure of being trained and graded by Sensei Amos Parker, the highest ranking non-Japanese Aikidoist practitioner in the world, before his passing in 2013. Tonight, Larry takes us not to the world of martial arts, but to the very American world of LARD, fish fry. Following Larry, we will have the pleasure of hearing from Mr. Stephen H. Hobbs, Esquire. Stephen is a story framer who structures stories around history, law, entrepreneurship, quilting, world culture, ethics, and family. He tells stories to uplift the human spirit, build community, and pursue social justice. Formerly a law professor, Hobbs earned a Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies from Harvard University and a Juris Doctorate from the University of Pennsylvania Law School. Tonight, he takes us to accomplishments on the football field and nuances the achievements attained at Harvard and Penn, while we hear of the life lessons he learned from his dad. Amy Joy Myers will follow. She is one of our 2 women tonight paying tribute to our dads. She is Connecticut native, living the last 25 years in New Haven. She's a clinical social worker who lives in a house with a purple door with her wife, her pup, and her cat. She is newer to the world of storytelling out loud, but if I hadn't told you, you would never know. Tonight, she shares a slice of life from her growing up in suburban Connecticut. By the Book is the name of her story. So settle in and enjoy these stories by our first 3 artists.
Summertime.
There you go.
It is barbecue season. Now, for most people, the official start of barbecue season is Memorial Day weekend, with the next big barbecue day being Father's Day. But at my daddy's house in Fort Washington, Maryland, you see, barbecue season, well, that was a year-round event. You see, so long as those charcoals would get hot, we were grilling. Fall leaves, ever hear of a broom? Sweep them off and light that grill. Winter snow, sons, get out there and shovel so dad can light up that grill. Spring rain, ever hear of an umbrella? No. At my daddy's house, barbecue season was a year-round event. But the official start of the summer season for my daddy was the annual family fish fry. That's right. That fish fry usually took place Memorial Day weekend. And in the summer of 1986 there in Fort Washington, Maryland, oh, my daddy's gonna let me for the very first time participate in this family tradition. I was a college freshman and my daddy called me and he said, son, and I said, sir. He said, I want you to go down to the Giant, a local grocery chain there. And he said, I want you to pick me up some lard. Now, I thought to myself, lard? Now, I've been reading all about how bad animal fat was and how you were supposed to keep away from it. But this is my daddy. And so I looked at my daddy and I said, yes, sir. I jumped in my daddy's Toyota Corolla. I took my daddy's Toyota Corolla with two hands on the steering wheel, put it in reverse, looked over my shoulder and backed up, eased myself out of the driveway. And on my daddy's radio, the Temptations were playing The Way You Do the Things You Do. As I drove down Logren Road, going down the hill, two hands on the steering wheel, I came to the stop sign, that area where I knew my daddy couldn't see me anymore. My left hand went off the steering wheel, went down to the seat, reclined the seat. At the same time, my left knee came up to get a control of the steering wheel as my right hand went over to the radio station to change the station to some Run DMC playing. It's tricky to bust around, that's right on time, it's tricky. I then put on my left signal light, made that left turn with a little gangster lean in the turn onto Fort Foot Road. And I drove with one hand on the steering wheel to the Giant. I got the quantity of lard that my daddy told me to get. I went back to the house. And when I made that right-hand turn on Logren Road, before my daddy could see me, my left hand went back to the seat to bring it back up. My right hand went over to the radio station to turn it back to my daddy's oldie station, where Smokey Robinson was singing Tracks of My Tears. I pulled up to the driveway, two hands on the steering wheel, left over right as I turned into the driveway, put the brakes on, got out of the car and brought my daddy his lard. My dad looked at that lard and he said, that's good, son. My dad then started to prepare the fish. Now, you see, my dad had a cast iron kettle. And if you don't know what that is, think about at Halloween when you see witches and that doing something like this. Yeah, my daddy had one of those. And that cast iron skillet or kettle, it was seasoned. You see, there's a certain way you have to clean that kettle so you don't mess up the flavor. So my dad pulled out that kettle. He put the lard in the kettle. And he told me to go bring down the fish so he can be ready when we started. I brought the fish down. Now, for those of you who don't know, you do not fry fish in flour. If you want to fry fish, you fry fish in cornmeal. You put the fish in the bag. You shake the bag to make sure that fish is covered properly. Cornmeal. I brought that fish down to my daddy. Now, my daddy, with his cast iron kettle, had actual logs underneath there that you had to light a match to light it. And when my dad wanted to check if that oil was ready, that lard, he had his own way of testing. See, we didn't have thermometers back then. Dad would take that cornmeal, little bit of a drop in. And when that cornmeal did what it was supposed to do, that meant that lard, the grease, was ready. Well, while my dad was waiting for that lard to get ready, he reached into the cooler and poured out a beer. He looked at me and said, son, you want one? I looked at my daddy and I said, yes. My first beer with my daddy. Now, you see, my dad had a special way of doing his beer. You see, first, he would take the beer in his left hand. Then he would take a napkin in his right hand. He would wipe the top of the can, open the beer up, take that napkin and put it to the bottom of his beer, then switch that can over to his left hand. I did exactly what my daddy did. And then when my dad had finished that ritual of how to properly open that beer, he took his first sip. I took my first sip. My dad then went back over to the cornmeal, put a little dabble there in the kettle, and the cornmeal did what it was supposed to do to let my daddy know that the grease was ready. My dad then took the fish. See, I wasn't old enough to do this yet. This is a man's job. I'm a young man in training, so this wasn't my job. My dad reached over and took the fish. He gave a little shake, just so you could knock off just a little bit of excess of that cornmeal. He let that fish hover over the kettle like he was trying to tip it. He then dropped that fish into the kettle. Ooh, the fish started frying. My dad grabbed the next fish, repeated the process, a little shake to get the excess cornmeal off, a little temptation hovering, and then a little drop in the grease, a certain way so that grease wouldn't splatter on you. But my dad, he was an expert. When my dad had got all the fish from the first batch in the grease, he took his beer, took his second sip. I took my beer. I took my second sip. Now my dad let that fish fry. And we talked, father-son talk. And then my dad said, son, it's ready. This was my job. I was going to take the fish out. I grabbed the basket. Oh, I was scared because I knew that if I dropped any of that fish, I would never hear the end of it. But more importantly, I did not want to disappoint my daddy. I put that basket in the fish, brought it up, and didn't drop a one. I took that fish over to the table and put the fish in the container. My dad looked at me and smiled. That's my boy. Go bring the second batch, son. I ran upstairs. I brought down the second batch. My daddy repeated the process. A little shake, a little temptation, and then a little drop. And he did that until the second batch of fish was in the oil cooking. My dad took his beer. The third sip. And I took my can and took my third sip. When that batch of fish was done, my dad gave me the nod that it was time to take it out. With a little bit more confidence, I took my basket, dipped it in there, got that fish out, didn't drop a one, put it in the serving container. Now, I'm going to tell you something. The fish looked good. And we had things just beside fish. We also had coleslaw. We had cornbread, because you have to have cornbread when you have fish with bones in it, because you might get one stuck in your throat. We also had fired up the grill where we had ribs cooked the right way. You don't preheat your ribs or take the ribs off the grill and put it in the oven. Ribs go on the grill raw, and they stay on the grill until they are ready to be eaten, falling off the bone. Well, dinner was ready, and we all sat down to eat. And I want to let you all in on a little secret. Earlier, I told you that the secret to a good fish fry was cornmeal. I lied. The secret to a good fish fry is L-A-I-D, lie, because that fish was good. Now, I know you're telling me or thinking to yourself that I'm telling you this story to make you hungry. Oh, no. You see, after the dinner was done, the younger people would play spades, while the adults played bid whist. And we would learn valuable lessons. You see, in bid whist, anything under a 5 is table talk. A 3 special, you barely have any cards and they're all low. That's what you're telling your partner. A 4 no, that means you don't have any trump, but you may have some aces and you're telling your partner you need some help. Yeah. Now, times have changed. We're a lot older now, but I'm fortunate. My daddy is still with me, and I get to do the fish fry nowadays. But what my dad created, beside a wonderful meal, was memories. Memories that I would cherish for the rest of my life. Memories of families getting together, of friends getting together, of sharing laughter, smiles, recipes, and yeah, some trash talk. So, as we continue during this summer season, what memories are you going to create? And if you need a little help, try a little LARD to help the occasion be a little tastier. That's my story.
Greetings. My name is Stephen Hobbs, also known as Stephen the Story Framer. My father and the fathers in my neighborhood always taught that we had to be twice as good to get half as far. And to achieve true equality, we had to demonstrate superior excellence. My father, the late Cornelius Hobbs, tried to teach that lesson by sharing stories of his days playing football at Somerville High School in New Jersey. He would tell us about all the adventures that he had as a football player. Particularly, for instance, he would say at the beginning of each preseason, one of the drills that they had was hitting a blocking sled. And they would push this blocking sled across the field. My father hit that blocking sled so hard that it broke. This gave him an exemption for the rest of the season from hitting that blocking sled. He played offense and defense, and he earned the nickname the Bone Crusher. In one game, he was playing defensive back, and the best runner from the other team ran to his side of the field, and my father tackled him ferociously. The player got up, looked my father in the eye, and said, "I'll be right back." He trotted back to his huddle, and they ran the very same play. And again, my father tackled him hard. This time that player got up and he looked my father in the eye and said, "I won't be back this side anymore during this game." And for the rest of the game, if he carried the ball, he always ran to the other side. One of the things that aggravated my father, though, was that on Fridays before the game, on Saturday, the fathers of some of the white players would come by to watch practice. And they'd see the coach and they'd say, "Hi, coach. Hi, coach." That meant I expect to see my son playing in the game tomorrow. Well, during the games, my father and some of the other black players would move the team down the field on offense. And when they got to the 10-yard line, they would be pulled by the coach. And the sons of those white fathers would be put into the game so they could score and get all the glory. Well, my father graduated in 1945, and he went into the Army at the end of World War II. He served as a clerk typist, and he was typing up court-martial documents, which had to be perfect. And he brought to that task his commitment to excellence, as he did with everything else in his life. Well, in 1967, it was my turn to play football at Bridgewater Raritan High School West. I wanted to be a running back like my father. By my sophomore year, I was the third string fullback. I rarely got my hands on the ball, and when I did, too often I would lose it. One Friday before a game, my father came by to watch practice. And he cornered the head coach, and in no uncertain terms, he said, "I expect to see my son playing in the games. Why isn't he playing?" Well, the next week, they switched me to defensive middle guard. And that next Saturday, I started. I later also played offensive guard, and I played on all the special teams. During my senior year, I was chosen for the first team, all county, and all state teams. I went off to college and realized that the players there were a lot bigger and a lot faster than I was. I served as a football manager. I was also on the varsity fencing team. Whatever glories or accolades or accomplishments that I received, I lay at the feet of my father, the late Cornelius Hobbs, where he taught both football and life, and that if we are committed to excellence and we are given the opportunity, there isn't anything we can't accomplish. Thank you.
I am standing in front of the circulation desk at the New Milford, Connecticut Public Library. The head librarian looks at me from her steel-rimmed glasses, smiling slightly. And though we don't know her, my father and I are familiar faces at the library. My dad stands behind me with his steady, heavy hands on my shoulders, squeezing lightly with reassurance. He is tall, graceful, and ebony black. At 14, I am pimply and awkward. It's 1985. The library is my dad's kind of place with its tomes, periodicals, and hushed people. He's a writer. He's a reader. He loves books. He has a lot of books at home, more than anyone I know. There are makeshift bookcases made of cinder blocks and wood boards, and books piled on the floor in his special room downstairs in our finished basement, the room we call Daddy's room. He has a set of encyclopedias that I love to use to look up random facts and random information, and an enormous dictionary that sits on a slab of marble on the floor that's way too heavy to lift. My dad, Gene Henry, was born in Pacolet, South Carolina, and grew up there until he was a teenager. He lived on land that his grandparents sharecropped. There were chickens and pigs. He called them hogs. This was the land where so many of my father's stories were born, the ones he wrote and the ones he told, like about the watermelons that grew on the farm and about the men who'd smash watermelons on the ground to make them burst open and then reach in and scoop out dripping red watermelon flesh by the fistfuls, doling it out to the workers right there in the field. And that was their lunch, a meal of warm, sun-baked watermelon. In 1985, though, we live in New Milford, Connecticut, far from Pacolet, South Carolina, where my mom buys watermelon from the Grand Union and where the fruit is always cold. She buys watermelon in secret, and my sisters and I eat it in secret. We've all been trained to wrap the rinds in newspaper and to hide all evidence that there had ever been watermelon in the house, because no matter served warm or cold, ever since Pacolet, South Carolina, my father hates watermelon, the smell of it, the sight of it, but he loves books. In Pacolet, my dad couldn't spend his free time any way he wanted. On Sundays, for instance, he had to sit for hours in church and then after church for more hours while the church mothers, like his grandmother, served a feast to the preacher. The preacher, he told me, got the meat, while my little boy father got only cornbread sopped in buttermilk. My father's childhood was one of scarcity and hunger, where there is never enough to feed his belly, never enough to feed his mind. According to his grandparents, the Bible was what he was supposed to read, and with that, my father was intensely dissatisfied. Hunger and longing were elements of all of the stories my father told me about his childhood. As a little boy, he could never understand why his mother left him with her parents, his grandparents in South Carolina, for months at a time, to travel to New York City to try to scrape a living together for herself and her children. He hated being left in South Carolina with the farm, the hogs, and the warm watermelon. He wanted nothing more than to be with his mother, to leave the dirt roads of Pacolet to be in New York, where he'd heard the buildings reached into the sky, where the roads were made of hard tar and the toilets were inside. My father's mother, my Nana, would come back to South Carolina for a while, and my dad would settle into a false security until she left for New York again, leaving him in constant yearning. He explained to me that in his adulthood, he discovered Black female authors like Alice Walker, Toni Morrison, and Paula Marshall, who helped him understand and make sense of a mother for whom it was necessary to leave her children for months at a time. He told me about the books that helped him understand his mother's hardships in a way that she could not have explained to herself, to her son, my father, her oldest child. Finally, when he was a teenager, along with hundreds and thousands of other Black people, my dad migrated from the South to the Northeast, and he joined his mother in New York City. He discovered more than skyscrapers. He discovered the New York Public Library system and that there was no shortage of books anywhere. He finished high school in New York and lived there into his late 20s, and then uprooted again, relocating his wife and 2 young children to Connecticut, wanting to move his family from the Bronx to a place where there were more trees than high rises. And fortunately, his job at a watch company invited him to do just that, to move to New Milford, Connecticut, where I was born in 1971, and where the population was less than 1% Black. My father had to cultivate his love of books on his own, but I had him to navigate me through mine. He always encouraged me to read. Whenever I said I was bored, he'd retort that people who read don't get bored. He never balked when I asked for money for the book club at school, and sometimes he and I would go to the local bookshop, the Bell Book and Candle, just to browse. Or when he was in the mood for a drive, which was often, we'd go to the nearest city, Danbury, where there is a Walden bookstore, and we'd both be content for hours. There were hours when I'd spend downstairs in Daddy's room with the 2 of us just reading quietly, only the sound of our turning pages. Books had been a savior to my father, and so of course he thought, what better place for my salvation than a library? That is why at 14, I'm standing here at the head librarian's desk at the public library in our town, a gorgeous orange brick building astutely situated on the village green. This at the end of the day, and at the end of a day that my dad took off from work. He took the day off from work to bring me to the county juvenile court. Because the week prior, I was caught with pockets full of nail polish, lip gloss, and cassette tapes. I was caught shoplifting, stealing from a local department store. Months before, my oldest sister schooled me on how to steal, sneaking around a Hallmark store while our mother shopped for greeting cards. Since then, I'd become her eager pupil, seduced by the out-of-character dance with danger that stealing provided me. Then I got caught. I was terrified. I'd never been in trouble before for anything. I was the girl who sat next to her dad on the couch reading aloud to him from books like Little House on the Prairie. I was an A student. I was in the marching band. It felt so surreal earlier that morning as my dad and I stood before the judge, with the judge asking me if I knew it was wrong to steal. Yes, of course I did, and no, I would never do it again. My father, too, looking the judge in the face and telling him, my daughter is a good girl, and promising the judge that he'd never see either of us again. The judge ordered me to complete community service at any place that would have me. We drove away from the courthouse, and in the car, my dad talked to me in a tone that was serious, but not mean, stern, but not fearsome, patient, but not a pushover. This is not you, he said. After court, we ate pancakes at a diner. It was a sunny day and oddly turning into a father-daughter outing. We didn't talk anymore about my crime or even more about what I should do for community service. Instead, we talked about the diary of Anne Frank that I was reading in English class at school. We drank hot chocolate. And just before we went home, he drove through the center of town and parked his car in front of the library. This, he said, is where you will make it right. And so now we stand in front of the head librarian's desk. And when she asks, "What can I do for you?" I feel my dad's firm squeeze on my shoulders, and I know he won't tell my secret. My daughter needs a place to volunteer. Can you help?
Indaba is a community-wide gathering of residents and stakeholders of the greater Madison community who want to answer the question, but what can I do about racism? The conversation begins on September 10th, 2021, with a concert by Ubuntu Storytellers. It's followed by an opening retreat at Mercy by the Sea in Madison, Connecticut on September 11th, 2021, and it is free. So what do you think so far? Aren't we lucky to have such talent assembled and to hear them for only $7? Really, is this not the bargain of the year? And we're only halfway through tonight's gems. Thanks to the sponsorship of Indaba, we are able to bring you this evening tonight. If you'd like to know more about Indaba's conversation in the greater Madison Shoreline community, please email us at denisekpage@gmail.com and we can get information to you. Also, we are always opening to auditioning tellers for our projects. If you are a teller who identifies as Brown or Black heritage or know someone who does, we'd love to hear from them. We do have upcoming engagements and we're always open to new talent. So now we begin our final segment. We're honored to begin with Mr. Ben Cunningham. Ben won Boston's Big Mouth Off Story Slam at Boston Public Library's Rab Hall, and he was chosen to represent Mass Mouth in the Boston versus Philly Story Slam at Philadelphia's Book and Science Festivals. He was a guest storyteller at Mass Mouth's 2020-2012 Big Mouth Off at Coolidge Corner Theater in Brookline. Now, for those who may be new to the world of narrative storytelling, you may not know this, but Mouth Off is a big deal. And in addition, Mr. Cunningham is the 2021 Webby winner for his performance in Growing Up Black. If you haven't seen it, you'll want to, and you can find it by Googling it. In fact, I highly recommend checking out the websites, the blogs, the Facebook Live shows, the YouTubes of all of tonight's tellers. Who knew this kind of talent in this form of artistry was so available, so rich, and so rewarding? Following Ben will be Nick Baskerville. Mr. Baskerville will be the only teller this evening to tell his story from the perspective of being a dad. He is a storyteller and stand-up comic living in the DC, Maryland, and Virginia area. He has a blog, Storytelling on Purpose, and does comedy with 3 other comics on the Clean AF Show Facebook page, AF Comedy Show Facebook page. And you'll have to join in to find out what AF stands for. He's also a pretty darn good MC. Tonight, he brings us burgers and fries. And taking us out tonight is Miss Elizabeth Anton. Elizabeth has been telling stories ever since she recited Dr. Seuss' Green Eggs and Ham while turning the pages of the book, thus pretending to read to impress her uncle. She began writing her stories down sometime thereafter and has spent her life telling stories in a variety of forms. She's honored to be telling her story here tonight, The Stowaway.
About 2 years ago, I'm getting ready to leave my house just outside of Washington, D.C. I've got one thing on my mind: burgers and fries from Five Guys. Now, I don't know if there's a Burgers and Five Guys near where you are, but I do know there's at least one in every state. And Five Guys is a place where they take these well-done, juicy burgers and these awesome French fries, and they give you way more than you should. And to top it all off, while you're waiting for your order, they'll give you peanuts to snack on. 4 out of 5 doctors probably would not recommend that you eat there, which is why I'm only friends with one doctor. I don't need that kind of negativity in my life. Now, I'm not doing it just for me. I'm actually going to take my sidekick with me, my 7-year-old daughter, baby girl. Now, baby girl looks just like me. Okay, so she doesn't have an afro. No, she doesn't have a mustache either. You know, she's actually cute. But other than that, she looks just like me. She's a daddy's girl. I'm a girly dad, and I am excited to go into this venture. We leave our end of the road townhouse, and we get into my gray pick 'em up truck, and we make our way 5 minutes from where we're at towards the Five Guys Burger place. On the way there, we're on this narrow stretch of road where on the left-hand side is kind of an unkept, untamed place. On the right side is we're passing by a playground that we normally play. Just beyond that, I pull over and I stop. And I hear back from this adorable yet concerned voice, "Oh no, Daddy. Is everything okay?" Relax, baby. Everything's going to be fine. We just have a little bit of trouble that I need to take care of. And I'm ready for this. My family has prepared me for this. I've had all the talks. I've talked to all my friends. I've even watched and Googled this sort of stuff on YouTube. So I take a deep breath. I put my hands on the steering wheel and I wait. Every now and again, glancing in my rearview mirror, because in my rearview mirror, I see the red and blue lights that are flashing behind me. I'm going through in my mind a quick mental checklist of why I may have been pulled over. I know I wasn't speeding this time. I know my registration is paid up this time. And I know that my daughter is strapped in her seat nice and safe. Now that, ladies and gentlemen, that is every time. So I'm taking a deep breath and I'm feeling pretty good about my chances here that everything will go okay. It's important for me that things go well. Because see, sitting in the back is my baby girl. She is the first one in 2 or 3 generations on my side and then on my wife's side to have a home where there's a father and a mother, both married at the same time. If I don't do anything else, this may be my greatest legacy that I've provided to her. But in 2019, things aren't going great with African Americans in the police. But if we're honest, and I think we should be, that's gone on way longer than 2019. I look in my rearview mirror. Oh, sugar honey iced tea. I see not one, but 2 cops. The first one, he's walking his way up to the driver's side. The other one stops on the passenger side near the rear. Now, I may be trained and ready to take in all this, but I figure, a little prayer wouldn't hurt, add into this sort of thing. I'm not the best Christian. Like, I don't want to call me bad, but I'm not good at being a Christian. To be clear, like, there's different levels of bad, right? There's bad Christian, there's really bad Christian, there's politician Christian. I'm just regular bad. Maybe bad's not the word. Maybe it's more like part-time, right? Kind of like the Christian reserves, like the military dudes, right? I show up 1 week in a month, 2 weeks a year. I'm not quite sure what all benefits I do or don't get. And I may not really get to know them all until it's way too late. So by now, the police officer, he is there and he is looking at me and I'm looking at him. I double check his badge so I can see his name, even though I can't remember by now, but I do know that I looked. And I know I make a mental sketch of him in my mind in case I need it for later, but I couldn't really tell you what he looks like right now. Honestly, at this moment, I can't remember all he said, but I remember the most important parts where he said, blah, 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 blah. "Sir, you're missing your front license plate. I'm going to have to give you a warning." You know what? He's right. Well, I lost my front license plate a few months ago in one of the snowstorms, and I didn't really think it was all that big a deal. I mean, after all, I had the rear one with the right registration up to date. Thank you very much. So I didn't know it was even an issue. True to his word, he takes my information. He walks back to his car with the other guy. They sit in there for a few minutes. He comes back with my information and the warning, and then sends me on the way. As I drive off, I say, "See, baby, That wasn't so bad. It's not like cops are bad, but truth is, not all cops are good. I try not to focus on that right now. I try to stay focused on my main mission for the day: burgers and fries from Five Guys.
And taking us out tonight is Miss Elizabeth Anton. Elizabeth has been telling stories ever since she recited Dr. Seuss' Green Eggs and Ham while turning the pages of the book, thus pretending to read to impress her uncle. She began writing her stories down sometime thereafter and has spent her life telling stories in a variety of forms. She is honored to be telling her story here tonight, The Stowaway. Miss Anton.
Well, last winter, I decided I was going to take ice skating lessons because I wanted to learn how to ice skate again. Now, I haven't skated since I was really, really little. And my grandpa used to take me ice skating. You know what? I'd wobble onto that ice, gripping onto the edges, looking every inch like the Michelin Man. Wouldn't matter, not one bit. I still felt like a princess. And that's because my grandpa, he used to call me mi princesita, my little princess. And whenever he'd take me skating, he'd hold on to me tight, not wanting to let me go. And I'd be wriggling out of his grasp until finally he'd let me go onto the ice saying, ten cuidadito, mi princesa, be careful, my little princess. My grandpa, he was the love of my life. But you know, he practically raised me. My mother used to drop me off at my grandma and grandpa's when I was a little kid, and she'd go on to work. My grandpa and I, we had this game. It was my favorite. It was called Shopping in the Kitchen. And what it was is we would roll out a layer of pink Play-Doh, and I would take a cookie cutter in the shape of a giant penny, and I'd press down hard, and he would wipe away the excess. And then he'd help me put the penny into the bank. And every time we did that, we would count how many pennies I had in the bank. And when I got up to 10, my grandpa would take me shopping in the kitchen. In the kitchen, he would sell me a glass of milk and sell me a couple of cookies, and he would help me count out the pennies to buy my milk and my cookies. And then he'd help me count how many pennies I still had left in the bank. That's why when I went to Head Start at the age of 3, I already knew how to add and subtract. Now, the irony of this is that when my grandpa landed on the shores of Manhattan in 1924 from Ecuador, he didn't speak any English, nor did he know how to read or write. Well, one evening, I was finishing up my milk and cookies. My mother came home from work. I said to her, and we all gathered in the kitchen as we usually did, and I said to her, Ma, I don't care that Grandpa's a Negro. I love him so much. It was as though someone had sucked the air out of the kitchen. I couldn't breathe. And my mother, she grabbed my arm and she pinched my flesh between her fingers and she twisted. And she said, your grandfather is not Negro. He's Indian. And I said, like cowboys and Indians? And she twisted my flesh harder, knowing that it would bruise. No, he is Incan from Ecuador. Well, she let go, and I fled from the kitchen into the living room, and I threw myself on the couch sobbing. My grandpa, he came after me and held me and comforted me and sat me on his lap. And he began telling me the story of his childhood in Ecuador. Mi padre era militar, era coronel en el ejército español. My father was a colonel in the Spanish army. He was tall, with blue eyes and blonde hair and a long blonde mustache. And he fell in love with my mother, who was an Incan princess, and she had long black hair braided down her back. And when my mother died, giving birth to me, my father was so sad that he asked the nuns if at the orphanage if they would take care of me, and they said yes. Well, my grandpa, He escaped from those nuns at the age of 14. He went in search of the fabled city by the sea. It's on the other side of the mountain. And so, all alone, my grandpa, he trekked through this dark, scary forest. And one night, a big black mountain lion scared him and chased him up into the tree. And for 3 days and 3 nights, my grandpa, he couldn't eat or sleep or drink until finally my grandpa got so angry that he shook his mighty fists and he beat his mighty chest and he let out a mighty roar. And that mountain lion, he got so scared, he ran away. And so eventually my grandpa, he got to the end of the forest, and there it was, Guayaquil, that fabled city by the sea. My grandpa, he saw the ocean for the first time.
Mhm.
And in that ocean, there were boats, big boats, giant boats. He'd never seen anything like it. He got so curious that he went onto one of those boats to explore. That's how my grandpa ended up a stowaway. Well, 3 months later, when my grandpa walked off the gangway onto the shores of Manhattan, it was winter, and he stood shivering in the only piece of winter clothing he had. It was a blue pea coat that had been given to him by one of the crew. They'd taken up a collection and put $11 in his pocket. Can you imagine? A fortune. Well, I don't know if my grandpa stood in bread lines that winter, if he sheltered in church basements. He never said. But what I do know is that eventually he got a job helping build ships on one of the shipyards in Manhattan. And then he met my grandmother, who was an immigrant, or had emigrated from Puerto Rico. And they moved to the Bronx, where they moved into a tiny little 2-bedroom apartment where they had my mother and my uncle. And that apartment was the one where eventually one day he would take care of me.
Mhm.
Well, Grandpa, he never liked the winters, not particularly. His tropical blood never felt the need to thicken, I suspect, but he also hated being cooped up. So he would often take me ice skating. Now, these ice skating trips for me were a welcome respite from the violence that I was experiencing at home. Well, anyway, I think for my 7th birthday, my grandpa bought me a pair of white ice skates, and he had them laced with pink pom-pom shoelaces, which matched my pink knit hat with a pink pom-pom, and I had a matching pink scarf and matching pink gloves, and I felt, yes, you guessed it, every inch the princess. And he would hold me really tight, and I'd wriggle out of his arms, and he'd say, "Ten cuidado, mi princesita," and he'd let me glide onto the ice. My grandpa and I, he was the joy of my life. And I wish it could have stayed that way. But when my mother died, in March of 1986, my grandpa and I, we'd been estranged for a number of years at that point. I have a very vivid memory of him kneeling at my mother's coffin, keening, sobbing, "Ay, mi hija, mi alma. Oh, my daughter, my soul." And even though I could feel my grandpa's pain, I was so bitter at that point that I did not go to comfort him. The rift happened one summer afternoon when I was 16, and my mother and I had this knockdown, drag-out fight, which we often did. I don't even remember what it was about. But at one point, my mother upped and slapped me across the face. I remember the shock of that slap and the stinging on my cheek. And I felt my rage and my tears. And instead of just swallowing it all down, which is what I usually did, I upped and slapped her right back. It was my turn then to see my mother's eyes wide with shock and her hand going up to her cheek. And we were both screaming at each other so loudly that my grandpa came running in, afraid, I'm sure. And he stood there and I said, Grandpa, she hit me first. And then I could see it register on my grandfather's face that I had hit his daughter. And even though she had hit me first, I could see in the expression on his face that that was not okay. That in his world, it was not okay to hit one's mother, his daughter. And as devastated, and I remember the expression, I remember his expression turning from anger, from shock to anger to disgust. And then he sort of turned on his heels and left the kitchen. And I was devastated because in that moment, I understood that though my grandpa loved me very much, and he did, his loyalties were, of course, with his daughter, my mother, his daughter, and that I was princess number 2. Well, Grandpa died about a year later, and he died of a cerebral embolism. And everyone said, though, that he died of a broken heart. Well, last winter, when I decided I was going to learn how to ice skate again, I'd wobble out onto that ice, looking every inch like the Michelin Man, dressed in 3 bulky layers, and I'd have my crash helmet, and of course it was pink. And I'd have wrist guards and elbow pads and knee pads and even a tailbone guard, which looks like an oversized diaper. No matter, I'd wobble out onto that ice feeling just like a princess. And I could close my eyes and I could see my grandpa standing at the edge of the rink, his blue eyes shining with pride. And at this stage in my life, you know, I can feel my grandpa's love and I can feel pride and gratitude for the ways in which he shaped me into the woman I am today. And so here I am wobbling out onto that ice, but in my mind, I'm wearing a pink skating costume with long sleeves that flutter in the breeze as I gather speed. And I think to myself, look at me, Grandpa. Look at me. Thank you.
Thank you for spending this evening with us. And shout out to all of you dads and father figures. As tonight has shown us, we need you, we love you, and sometimes it comes later in life and we honor you. Please join me in thanking these amazing artists who give so much of themselves this evening. And last but far from least, I'd like to thank the scores of you who either individually or through your organization helped to promote tonight's program. I am Denise Keys Page of Ubuntu Storytellers, and I say to you, I am because we are. Good night.